She had waited her whole life for this day, her son's wedding, a moment of pride, of love, of new beginnings. But as Grace stepped into the grand hall filled with white roses and laughter, she didn't know the same day would break her heart and awaken her strength. Welcome to True Voice. If you're watching this, subscribe, and let me know where you're watching from. The music swelled softly, and Grace smiled through tears as she watched her only son, Daniel, stand at the altar. She had raised him alone, through storms, through nights without heat, through dreams she couldn't afford. Today was supposed to be her reward. But when the young bride, Lila, walked up the aisle, something in her eyes was cold. Grace tried to shake it off, assuming it was just nerves. Yet deep down, she felt the temperature in the room shift, as if love had been replaced by quiet calculation. After the vows and applause, Grace waited patiently to be seated at the family table. But when she approached, one of the wedding planners blocked her with an awkward smile. "I'm sorry, ma'am. There's been a change in seating." The woman gestured toward the back, the kitchen. Grace blinked, confused. "The kitchen," she whispered. "Yes," the planner said softly. The bride insisted. Grace stood frozen as the reception buzzed on without her. She could see Daniel laughing with Lila's parents, champagne flutes raised, photographers snapping away. No one noticed the mother of the groom being guided behind swinging doors into a small, humid room that smelled of spices and smoke. Her place card sat on a stool beside a stack of trays. She was told kindly, "We'll bring your plate here." For a long moment, Grace just stared at it, the floral print name tag with her handwriting, carefully written days ago when she'd offered to help with the invitations. Her heart sank, but she didn't cry. Not here. She had learned long ago that silence was more powerful than begging for a seat. She smoothed her pale blue dress, lifted her chin, and whispered to herself, "It's all right. Let them think this is where I belong." As laughter echoed from the hall, Grace sat quietly in that kitchen, hearing her son's toast through the wall. "To love, to family, and to the woman who taught me everything, Lila." Not Mom, just Lila. That was when something inside her shifted. Her smile trembled, then disappeared entirely. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. What no one at that wedding knew was that Grace had been the one paying for it all. Every flower, every gown fitting, every plate on those glittering tables. When Daniel said he couldn't afford the venue, she had quietly dipped into her savings, the money she'd planned to use for her small retirement cottage. She hadn't told him, wanting the gift to be a surprise. But now, as she sat beside the kitchen sink with a forgotten meal and a broken heart, that gift no longer felt like love. It felt like betrayal dressed in white. When the band started playing the couple's first dance, Grace walked out unnoticed. Her heels clicked against the marble floor, echoing through the corridor like a soft heartbeat fading into resolve. She drove home in silence, her reflection in the car window looking strangely calm, too calm for someone who had just been humiliated. That night, while the young couple basked in wedding bliss, Grace opened her laptop and logged into her accounts. Line by line, she reviewed every payment made in the months leading up to the wedding. The florist, the catering, the venue deposit, all in her name. And with each click, a quiet strength grew inside her chest, not fueled by anger but by clarity. By morning the calls started. The venue owner, the photographer, the decorator, all wanted confirmation of a chargeback. Grace didn't answer. She simply smiled, sipping her tea by the window. The sky outside glowed pink and gold, a new day breaking, one that didn't require her to beg for gratitude. A few hours later, her phone rang again. It was Daniel. His voice was panicked. "Mom, what did you do? They said the payments were reversed. The bills are in your name. They're saying the wedding's unpaid." Grace listened quietly. "Daniel," she said softly, "you sat me in the kitchen at your wedding. Maybe that's where you thought I belonged. But the truth is, I was the one who paid for that seat, and every other one in that hall." There was silence on the line, followed by Lila's voice shouting in the background. Grace didn't raise her tone. "You see, darling, love doesn't live where respect dies. Consider it my final gift to you. Freedom from depending on me." And before he could speak, she hung up. Days later, news spread that the venue was pressing charges for unpaid fees. Lila's family, known for appearances, scrambled to save face. The glamorous photos from that day vanished from social media as quickly as they were posted. Meanwhile, Grace went on with her quiet life, tending her garden, reading by her window, smiling again. She had lost her seat at a table, but she'd reclaimed her peace. Still, some nights, when the moonlight filtered through her curtains, she wondered if her son understood the lesson behind her silence, that love without gratitude is hollow, and a mother's dignity is worth more than gold. But the answer would come soon enough. Because one evening, a knock echoed at her door. When she opened it, Daniel stood there, suit wrinkled, eyes red, voice trembling. "Mom, everything's gone wrong. I need your help." Grace looked at him for a long moment, her heart aching yet steady. Then slowly she stepped aside. "Come in," she said softly. "But this time we'll talk about respect first." Daniel stepped inside, the air heavy with regret and shame. Grace could smell the faint scent of cologne and desperation clinging to his jacket, a boy lost in a man's body. He stood in the middle of her small living room, surrounded by the quiet that used to comfort him as a child. The same walls that once heard bedtime stories now stood witness to his broken pride. "Mom," he began softly, his voice trembling. "Lila left." Grace didn't flinch. She simply folded her hands in her lap and waited. "She said I embarrassed her. The venue sent notices. Her parents found out the bills weren't paid. They're threatening to sue me." His words fell apart, one after another, like bricks sliding off a wall. Grace watched him, not with anger, but with the stillness of someone who had already cried all her tears. "And what do you want me to do, Daniel?" she asked. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. I need your help, please. I don't have the money to fix this. They said if I don't pay by next week, they'll take me to court." Grace's eyes softened, but she didn't move. She remembered the kitchen, the sting of humiliation, the laughter that had poured through the walls as she ate alone. "Do you remember," she said quietly, "the day I taught you how to save your allowance for something you wanted?" He looked up, confused. "You were 7, she continued. "You wanted that model car. I told you that if you spent every coin on candy, you'd have nothing left when something truly mattered." "Mom," he whispered, "please. This isn't the same." "It's exactly the same," she replied gently. "You spent your gratitude. You spent your respect. You spent it all on appearances. And now there's nothing left when it matters most." Daniel's eyes glistened. "I didn't mean to hurt you. I didn't know Lila." His voice trailed off. Grace looked at him for a long moment, then rose and walked to her cabinet. From it, she pulled a small envelope, thick, sealed, and slightly worn. She placed it on the table in front of him. "I had this saved for your first home," she said. "But you already sold the home I gave you, your trust. So before I help you, I need to ask, are you coming here as my son, or as someone who only needs my money?" He hesitated, guilt shadowing his face. "As your son," he whispered. Grace nodded slowly. "Then you'll earn back my help, not with words but with actions." Over the next few weeks, Daniel came by every evening. He mowed the lawn, cooked dinner, fixed broken shelves, things Grace hadn't asked for but silently appreciated. First he did it out of guilt. But soon she saw something shift in his eyes, humility. The kind that can't be taught, only learned through pain. One evening, while washing dishes side by side, Grace spoke softly. "Your father left us with nothing but debts. I worked 3 jobs to give you a chance at life. I wanted you to build something better, not to forget where you came from." Daniel looked at her, the weight of his mistakes pressing down. "I see that now," he said quietly. I don't know how to make it right." Grace smiled faintly. "You already started." A week later, she accompanied him to the venue's office. The manager, stern and unsympathetic, laid the papers on the desk. "The total due is $47,000, he said flatly. Daniel swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he signed the repayment plan. Grace stood beside him, calm and silent. When it was done, she placed her hand over his. "This is your burden now. Don't let shame destroy you. Let it build you." As they walked out, Daniel turned to her. "You really aren't going to pay it off for me?" She smiled softly. "No, son. Because I want you to remember this moment every time you're tempted to forget who helped you stand." For the first time, Daniel didn't argue. He simply nodded. Months passed. Daniel moved into a smaller apartment and found extra work. Lila filed for divorce, leaving him with little more than a suitcase. Through it all, Grace stayed close, not as a savior, but as a quiet reminder of resilience. One day, as she sat in her garden trimming roses, Daniel came to her again, not broken but steady. "Mom," he said, "I paid the last installment today." Grace looked up, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you." He smiled faintly. "I understand now why you didn't help me with money. You were helping me with something bigger." She nodded, touching his hand. "Pride can blind a man faster than failure. You needed to see the world without your reflection in it." For a moment, peace filled the air between them. Soft, fragile, beautiful. But then Daniel's phone buzzed. He frowned, reading the message. His face paled. "Mom," he whispered, "Lila's suing me again. She says I hid money from her during the wedding. She wants half of everything I own." Grace's hand froze midair, the pruning shears glinting in the sunlight. She met his eyes, calm but firm. "Then it's time," she said softly. "You learned that not every battle is fought with love." Daniel stared at her, unsure what she meant. Grace rose, dusting her hands off her apron. "I didn't tell you this before," she continued, "but I still own the account that handled all the wedding payments. And every document, every receipt, still bears my name." He blinked, realization dawning slowly. "You mean?" She looked toward the horizon, the sunlight painting her silver hair gold. "I mean, my dear boy. She's about to learn what happens when you try to take from a woman who's already lost everything once." Her eyes held a quiet fire, not vengeance but justice reborn. Because Grace Lane was done being humiliated. And this time she wouldn't just stand in the kitchen. She'd own the entire house. The morning after Daniel's confession, Grace sat at her kitchen table with a cup of tea growing cold in her hands. Outside, the world went on as usual. Children walking to school, a dog barking down the street, the hum of life unbothered by the quiet storm inside her chest. She opened the drawer beside her and pulled out a folder labeled, Estate and Holdings. Her handwriting was neat, patient, the kind of precision that came from years of doing things the hard way. She flipped through the documents. Property deeds, payment slips, receipts from the catering company, invoices for the wedding hall. Every single one was signed Grace Lane. Every cent that funded that lavish wedding had passed through her account. And though Daniel hadn't noticed at the time, Grace had been meticulous. She'd kept everything under her name because she never fully trusted the world that had once left her with nothing. Now that caution was her power. When Daniel arrived that afternoon, he looked worn, his shirt wrinkled, eyes shadowed by sleepless nights. "Mom, Lila's lawyer called again," he said, running a hand through his hair. "They're threatening to freeze my bank account." Grace's expression didn't change. She gestured for him to sit. "Let them," she said softly. "What do you mean, let them?" he asked, frowning. Grace opened the folder and slid a stack of papers toward him. "They can't touch what isn't yours," she said. "Everything that paid for that wedding, the venue, the catering, the decorations, even her gown, was funded through my account. Under my name." Daniel's mouth fell open. "Wait. Are you saying she can't legally claim any of it?" Grace leaned back, her calm smile tinged with quiet satisfaction. "That's exactly what I'm saying." He stared at her, disbelief giving way to something else. Admiration, maybe even pride. "You planned this." "I prepared," Grace corrected. "After what happened at that wedding, I learned something. Silence doesn't mean surrender. It means watching long enough to know exactly where to strike." Over the next few days, Grace and Daniel met with a lawyer. The documents spoke for themselves. Every check, every transfer, every signature led back to her. Lila's team had no case. Within a week, the court dismissed the claim entirely. But Grace wasn't done. One evening as Daniel stood by the window, he asked, "So, that's it? It's over?" Grace didn't answer immediately. She was stirring a pot of stew, her movements slow and deliberate. "No, Daniel," she said finally. "It's never over until you reclaim your peace." She turned off the stove, wiped her hands, and faced him. "Tell me, whose name is on the lease of the apartment Lila's living in?" Daniel blinked. "Mine." "Why?" "Good," Grace replied. "Then tomorrow, you'll deliver her a notice to vacate. It's time she learned that comfort isn't a right she can steal." He hesitated. "You really think that's fair?" Grace met his gaze, her tone steady. "Fair? Well, but it's just, she humiliated me in front of hundreds of people. She took your kindness and twisted it into vanity. This isn't revenge, Daniel, it's closure." The next day, Daniel followed her advice. He hand-delivered the notice, his fingers trembling as he slipped it under the door. Through the thin walls, he could hear Lila's voice, angry, frantic, calling someone on the phone. But he didn't stay to listen. He walked away, lighter than he had felt in months. When he returned home, Grace was waiting on the porch, pruning the roses again. "Did you do it?" she asked. "Yes," he said. She was furious. Grace smiled faintly. "Good. Anger is the first step to understanding loss." That night, they sat together under the porch light, the silence between them no longer heavy. Daniel finally spoke. "Mom, do you ever regret it? The way you handled the wedding?" Grace looked up at the stars, her eyes reflecting the light. "No," she said. "Because forgiveness without change is just permission to hurt you again." He nodded slowly, letting the words sink in. But their peace wouldn't last. The next morning, Grace received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, cold, sharp, spoke on the other end. "Mrs. Lane. This is Detective Harris from the county office. We need to speak with you about an investigation involving the wedding payments. It seems someone has accused you of financial fraud." Grace's heart stopped. "Fraud?" she repeated quietly. "Yes, ma'am," the detective replied. "It appears some of the funds used for the wedding came from an insurance payout under your late husband's name. We'll need you to come in for questioning." When the call ended, Grace sat in silence, the air around her suddenly too thick to breathe. Daniel found her sitting at the table, pale and still. "Mom, what happened?" She looked up slowly, her voice calm but heavy. "Your father," she whispered. "The insurance money. It wasn't supposed to resurface. But someone found it." Daniel's eyes widened. "Who would do that?" Grace turned toward the window, where the morning light filtered through the lace curtains. Her gaze hardened. "Someone who wants to destroy what's left of us," she said softly. And in that moment she knew. Lila wasn't finished. The battle that had started in silence was about to echo louder than ever. The courthouse smelled faintly of paper and rain. Grace Lane stood in the hallway, clutching her worn handbag like a shield, her calm composure masking the storm beneath her ribs. Daniel stood beside her, tense and pale. "Mom," he whispered, "this is insane. You didn't steal anything. That insurance payout was yours." Grace didn't reply. She simply exhaled, her breath steady, her eyes tracing the corridor ahead. At the far end, a woman appeared. Elegant, poised, wearing a crimson coat that made her presence impossible to ignore. Lila. Her son's estranged wife. Her enemy now cloaked in sophistication and legal righteousness. Their eyes met, and in that brief silence, years of love, betrayal, and pride collided. Lila's lips curled into a faint smirk as she whispered something to the man beside her. Her lawyer. Grace watched her with an expression of quiet disappointment. Not hate. Hate would have given Lila too much power. Inside the courtroom, the air was sharp. The clerk called her name. Grace Lane. She stood, her steps measured, voice unwavering as she answered the questions thrown at her. Yes, I funded the wedding, she said. Yes, the funds came from an account in my husband's name, but it was my account after his passing. The bank records confirm it. Lila's lawyer tried to spin the story, painting Grace as manipulative, a woman trying to control her son's life through money and guilt. Grace didn't react. She sat with her hands folded, dignity wrapped around her like silk. When the judge asked if she had anything to add, Grace stood once more. I didn't steal from anyone, she said softly. I built that home. I built that family. And I paid for that wedding not to own them, but because I believed they deserved joy. If that belief is a crime, then I suppose I'm guilty of loving too deeply. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Even the judge paused, eyes softening briefly before lowering his gaze to the papers. By the end of the hearing, it was clear. There was no fraud. Every document supported her claim. Grace was cleared. But as she stepped outside into the drizzle, she found Lila waiting by the steps. You think you've won, Lila said quietly, her voice trembling with fury. But you haven't seen what I can do. Grace looked at her calmly. You already did enough, she replied. You broke your own heart trying to ruin mine. Lila scoffed. You're old, Grace. You don't understand how the world works anymore. Grace's lips curved into the faintest smile. Oh, I understand perfectly. I just stopped playing by its rules. She turned to leave, but before she could step away, Lila called after her. Daniel will see who you really are soon enough. Grace paused for just a second, her back still turned. He already has, she said, and walked into the rain. That night, Daniel came home with takeout and 2 mugs of tea. He found his mother at the kitchen table, staring at an envelope. It came today, she said. A letter from the insurance office. They've reviewed everything. Daniel held his breath as she opened it. A moment later, her shoulders relaxed. They've reinstated the remaining balance, she whispered. Everything is clean. Relief flooded the room, quiet but powerful. Daniel sat beside her. So, that's it. Grace looked at him, her eyes weary but bright. For now, she said. But something tells me she's not done yet. He frowned. You think Lila will try again? Grace nodded slowly. People like her don't accept defeat. They turn it into obsession. Days passed. The tension settled but never disappeared. Grace went back to her routines, tending her garden, baking bread, volunteering at the community center. On the surface, life seemed normal again. But in the quiet moments, she could feel it. The shift in the air, the whisper of something unfinished. Then, one evening, she received an unexpected visitor. A young woman stood on her porch, soaked from the rain, clutching a folder to her chest. Mrs. Lane, she asked nervously. My name's Clara. I used to work for Lila. Grace hesitated before opening the door wider. Come in, dear. You're freezing. Clara stepped inside, her eyes darting around the cozy kitchen. I shouldn't be here, she said. But you need to see this. She opened the folder, revealing copies of bank transfers, text messages, and contracts. Lila's been moving money from Daniel's old account to an offshore fund. And she's been using your name. Grace's heart stilled. My name, she whispered. Clara nodded, trembling. She's framing you for the next move. I couldn't stay silent. Grace's expression remained calm, though her pulse roared beneath the surface. Thank you, she said softly. You did the right thing. After Clara left, Grace sat alone, staring at the documents. The rain outside grew heavier, streaking the windows like falling threads of glass. She whispered to herself. So this is how she wants to end it. She closed the folder, stood, and walked to her desk. With steady hands, she pulled out her old typewriter, a relic from her working days, and began to write a letter. Dear Lila, she typed. You've taken everything you could from me, but you forgot one thing. The truth always finds its way home. Her fingers paused above the keys. A faint smile touched her lips. Let's see how long it takes you to realize the game's already over. Because what Lila didn't know was that Grace had already called the bank 3 days ago, and had every one of her accounts monitored. And by morning, it wouldn't be Grace facing an investigation. It would be Lila herself. The morning sun filtered through gauzy curtains, soft and golden, a deceptive calm before the unraveling. Grace Lane sat at her kitchen table, tea cooling beside a stack of papers. The documents Clara had given her now lay neatly arranged, labeled, copied, and sealed. Across the table, Daniel watched his mother, unease flickering in his eyes. Mom, he said finally, are you sure you want to go through with this? Grace didn't look up. I didn't start this, she said softly, her voice a quiet flame. But I won't let her end it on her terms. Down the road, Lila's life still looked perfect. The manicured garden, the luxury car gleaming in the driveway, the morning coffee poured into delicate porcelain. But beneath that porcelain shine, cracks were spreading. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications. Missed calls from her lawyer, unread emails from the bank. When she finally picked one up, the words froze her mid-sip. Account access suspended. Pending investigation. Her hand trembled. No, she whispered, scrolling through the messages, each one confirming the same. Her accounts had been flagged. Every transfer, every false name, every shadow trail that pointed back to her. Grace didn't need revenge. The truth was doing the work for her. That afternoon, Grace arrived at the local bank. She greeted the clerk with the same gentle tone she'd used for decades. Good morning, Tom. I believe the investigator from headquarters will be calling today. Tom smiled nervously. Yes, Mrs. Lane. They already have everything you sent, including that note from your late husband. Grace nodded, eyes softening for a brief second. Then let the truth rest where it belongs. Meanwhile, in her upscale apartment across town, Lila's composure finally cracked. She was pacing, muttering to herself, dialing Daniel's number over and over. When he finally answered, his tone was wary. Lila. Daniel, you have to listen to me, she said, her words coming fast, desperate. Your mother, she's setting me up. The accounts, the money. It's not what it looks like. Daniel's silence stretched for too long. When he finally spoke, it was quiet, resolute. No, Lila. I think for the first time, it's exactly what it looks like. He hung up. Hours later, Grace sat in her living room, the fireplace glowing softly. Daniel arrived carrying a box. It's from Lila's lawyer, he said, setting it down. Apparently, she's moving out of state. They wanted you to have this. Grace opened the box carefully. Inside were the remnants of a life that once looked perfect. The framed photo from the engagement party, a thank you card she'd written them, unopened, and at the bottom, the receipt for the wedding venue. The one Grace had paid in full. She smiled faintly, shaking her head. Funny how everything comes full circle, she murmured. Daniel sat down across from her. Mom, I don't know what to say. I let her control everything. I let her decide how we treated you. Grace held up a hand, her voice kind but firm. You were young. You wanted peace. But peace built on silence never lasts. He looked down, shame flickering across his face. I lost you. She smiled sadly. No, Daniel. You let me go. There's a difference. But losing me, that was her mistake. The wind rustled softly against the windows. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang. Later that evening, Grace walked through her garden, the scent of lavender thick in the air. She paused by the rosebush her husband had planted years ago, kneeling to brush the petals with her fingertips. You'd laugh if you saw how this turned out, she whispered. You always said truth blooms in its own time. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from Clara. It's done. They've filed charges. Lila's accounts are frozen indefinitely. Grace exhaled slowly. Not joy, not even satisfaction, just release. She typed back. Thank you, dear. It's time to rest. As the evening deepened, Daniel joined her in the garden. So what now, Mom? He asked softly. Grace smiled, her eyes reflecting the gold of the setting sun. Now, she said, I rebuild. For me this time. He nodded, then hesitated. Will you ever forgive her? Grace's gaze drifted toward the horizon. Forgiveness, she said quietly, isn't for her. It's for me. But forgetting, that's a luxury I've earned the right not to afford. They stood there together, surrounded by the hum of cicadas and the faint perfume of roses, two people bound by blood and brokenness, but also by something stronger, truth reclaimed. Just as Daniel turned to go inside, a car slowed in front of the house. Grace looked up. A sleek black sedan stopped at the curb. The window rolled down, and there she was, Lila. Her eyes red-rimmed, her posture fragile in a way Grace had never seen before. She didn't speak, just looked at Grace, something unreadable flickering behind her gaze. Then, without a word, she drove off. Grace's heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. She simply watched the car disappear into the night and whispered to herself, the storm's not over yet. Because deep down, she knew Lila wasn't leaving in defeat. She was regrouping. And the next move would be darker than anyone imagined. It had been 3 weeks since the silence settled. Heavy, unnatural, the kind that hums just before a storm. Grace Lane had learned to live in quiet again. The morning light on her curtains, the steady rhythm of her garden, the calm of knowing that justice had begun to take its course. But even peace, she realized, could be fragile when built on unfinished truths. Daniel had started visiting more often, helping around the house, trying to rebuild what his marriage had fractured. He'd replaced the old fence, repainted the porch, and brought laughter back into rooms that had forgotten how to echo. But Grace could still sense his unease. Every time her phone rang, every time a car slowed near the house, he would glance up, waiting for something neither of them wanted to name. One evening the doorbell rang. Grace opened it to find a courier standing there, holding a large brown envelope. "Delivery for Mrs. Grace Lane," he said. She thanked him and took it inside, her heart tightening. The handwriting across the front was familiar, sharp, elegant, and deliberate. Lila's. Daniel came in just as she was opening it. Inside was a single folded letter and a stack of photographs. Grace hesitated before reading. The letter began simply. "You took everything from me, Grace. My husband, my home, my peace. But you forgot one thing, I never lose. Not really. You may have won this battle, but you've lit a fire you can't put out." Daniel froze as his mother flipped through the photos. Images of her garden, her mailbox, her car. All recent. All taken from nearby. "She's watching you," he whispered, voice tight. Grace closed the envelope calmly. "No," she said, her voice steady but firm. "She's reminding me." That night, Grace couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. The glow of a car's headlights moved slowly along the road, then stopped near her driveway before disappearing. Her chest tightened, but she didn't call the police. Not yet. Instead, she opened her laptop and searched for a name she hadn't spoken aloud in months. Michael Rivers, her late husband's former attorney. The man who'd handled every estate detail, every asset transfer, every clause she'd quietly enforced when Lila thought the world was hers to control. When Michael answered her call the next morning, his tone was warm but cautious. "Grace, I wondered when you'd reach out again. I need to know if the clause still holds," she said softly. "It does," he replied. "As long as she violates the trust conditions, she loses access to everything. But, Grace, you sure you want to go down that road? It's a final blow." Grace looked out the window, her garden glistening after the rain. "Michael," she said quietly. She already started the fire. "I'm just deciding where it burns." Meanwhile, across town, Lila sat in a rented apartment, stripped of luxury, of the comfort she once flaunted. Bills piled up around her, and her phone buzzed with messages from creditors and lawyers. But none of it mattered. Her obsession had turned inward, sharpening into something darker. On her wall hung a printed copy of Grace's house deed. Pinned beside it were photos of Grace's new investments, Daniel's visits, and a note scrawled beneath. "Take back what's mine." When Daniel went to check on her a few days later, her old apartment was empty. Neighbors said she'd moved out in the night. No forwarding address, no explanation. Only a single envelope left under the door with his name on it. Inside was a photo of Grace's garden. And a key. He raced home, panic clawing at his chest. Grace met him at the door, calm as ever. "She's not going to hurt me, Daniel," she said quietly, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of unease she couldn't hide. "How do you know that?" he demanded. "Because she already has," Grace said, her voice heavy. "And I survived." That night, as the wind howled and the lights flickered, Grace went to her desk. She pulled out the final set of documents, the emergency clause her husband had written long ago. It gave her power to liquidate the remaining assets under Lila's name and reroute them to charity. It wasn't revenge. It was release. She signed her name slowly, deliberately, the ink drying like a final heartbeat. Then she looked out at the storm and whispered, "You chose this path, Lila. I'm just closing it." But just as she stood to leave the room, she noticed something on her window. Faint but visible. Fingerprints. Fresh. Grace's breath caught. She turned slowly toward the back door. It was open, just slightly, and from the darkness outside, a single voice, trembling, half-broken, whispered her name. "Mom!" Grace froze. Her heart thundered. That voice, she hadn't heard it in weeks. But it wasn't Daniel's. It was Lila's. Wet hair clinging to her face, eyes hollow with exhaustion, Lila stood on the porch, shaking in the rain. "Please," she whispered, stepping closer. "I have nowhere else to go." Grace stared at her. The daughter who had humiliated her, betrayed her, and now stood before her like a shadow of the woman she once was. In that moment, everything Grace had built, her strength, her calm, her justice, collided with the ache of a mother's heart. She could slam the door, or she could open it. But before Grace could decide, a faint glint caught her eye, something metallic in Lila's trembling hand. Her heart stopped. The same key she'd once given her, the one that unlocked not just a door, but an entire past. Grace's hand hovered above the doorknob. The storm roared. Lila whispered again, "Please, let me in." And Grace, trembling between love and fear, whispered back, "Why now, Lila? What have you done?" The storm raged outside, lightning slicing across the sky as Grace stood frozen in her doorway. Lila's soaked silhouette trembled under the porch light, rainwater tracing her jawline like tears. The metallic key still glinted in her hand, a symbol, a threat, or a plea. Grace couldn't tell anymore. For a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The wind howled through the open door, carrying the smell of wet earth and regret. Grace's pulse pounded in her ears as memories flooded back. The laughter in that same doorway years ago, when Lila was just a child bringing her dandelions and calling them flowers. Now she was standing there, a stranger wrapped in the same body. "Please, Mom," Lila whispered, her voice cracking. "I didn't come to fight. I swear." Grace stepped back cautiously, her eyes locked on her daughter's face. Then why come now, Lila? After everything? Lila's chest heaved as she tried to speak. Because I was wrong. I thought I could control everything, the money, the house, even Daniel. But when I lost it all, I realized what I really lost was you. She took another step forward, her hand trembling around the key. I've been followed, Mom. Someone's after me. I think it's because of what I did. Grace's throat tightened. The flickering light cast fractured shadows across the floor, and in Lila's eyes, Grace saw both fear and desperation, a mixture she couldn't ignore. Come inside, Grace said quietly. Before the neighbors see. Lila entered, dripping rain onto the hardwood floor. Grace handed her a towel but kept her distance, watching as her daughter wrapped it around her shoulders and looked around the familiar space. The family photos, the fresh flowers, the calm she had once rejected. You kept everything, Lila murmured, her voice small. Not everything, Grace said softly. Just what still mattered. For a long time neither spoke. The rain softened outside, and the clock ticked steadily in the silence. Then Lila reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. Thick, sealed, marked with the name Rivers and Company. Legal consultants. She slid it across the table. You need to see this, she said. Grace hesitated, then opened it. Inside were documents. Property transfers, bank account closures, and letters addressed to Lila Rivers. The name of her late husband's firm stamped across the top. Her eyes narrowed. These aren't mine, Grace said slowly. No, Lila replied, voice trembling. They're his. Michael Rivers. Dad's attorney. He's been blackmailing me for months. Said if I didn't give him access to the trust accounts, he'd destroy what's left of our reputation, and yours. Grace's stomach turned. Michael had been her husband's closest friend, the one man she thought she could still trust. He's dead, Lila. He passed away last spring. Lila shook her head. That's what I thought. But he isn't. He's alive, hiding. He faked everything. Grace leaned forward, the blood draining from her face. What are you talking about? Lila pulled out a single photograph. Grainy, recent, taken near the docks. Michael Rivers, unmistakably alive, getting into a black car. He wants everything Dad left behind, Lila said. And he's using me to get to you. Grace's breath caught. The missing pieces began to connect. The strange calls, the photos of her garden, the letter. It wasn't Lila watching her. It was him. Suddenly, a sharp sound shattered the quiet, the creak of the back door. Both women froze. Grace stood slowly, motioning for Lila to stay quiet. The air grew thick, heavy with electricity. She moved toward the kitchen, the floorboards creaking under her feet. The door was ajar, swaying slightly in the wind. Then came a voice, deep, smooth, eerily calm. You always were a hard woman to scare, Grace. Lila gasped. Grace turned, and there he was. Michael Rivers, very much alive. His once slick hair now streaked with gray. His eyes cold and hollow. He stepped into the light, rain dripping from his coat. I warned her, he said, nodding toward Lila. But she's her mother's daughter. Stubborn, proud, reckless. Grace's heart thudded, but her voice was steady. You don't belong here, Michael. Oh, but I do, he said softly, walking closer. You built an empire on your husband's legacy. I built it with him. And when he died, you took what was mine. Lila clutched her mother's arm. Mom, please. Michael smirked. You see, Grace, your husband wasn't as noble as you think. He left you everything to protect himself. From me. Grace's breath caught. That's a lie. Then why did he give me this? Michael pulled something from his coat, an old gold pen. Her husband's. The one he'd always kept in his suit pocket. For a moment, Grace's composure cracked. Where did you get that? Michael smiled faintly. He gave it to me the day before he died. Told me if anything happened to him, I'd know what to do. He glanced at the folder on the table. I did exactly that. Lila stepped forward. You ruined everything. You lied to both of us. Correction, Michael said calmly, his tone turning sharp. Your mother lied first. I just made sure the truth found its way back home. Lightning flashed through the window, and for a heartbeat, all three faces, Grace's calm fury, Lila's trembling fear, and Michael's quiet menace, were illuminated in perfect, terrifying clarity. Then the lights went out. A crash echoed through the house. Lila screamed. Mom! Grace reached out in the dark, her hand finding Lila's. Stay close, she whispered. Outside, thunder rolled like an omen. Inside, shadows shifted, and the sound of slow footsteps began to move toward them. Grace took a deep breath, her voice low, resolute. Lila, she whispered. It's time you saw what your father was really protecting. The next flash of lightning revealed the truth, not in words, but in what Grace held in her hand. The duplicate key, the one she'd hidden long ago. The key to the safe her husband swore he'd never open again. The one marked for Grace. Only if he returns. And with that, the storm outside raged harder, as though the past itself was clawing its way back. The wind screamed against the windows as darkness swallowed the house whole. Grace could feel the walls trembling, not from the storm outside, but from the truth clawing its way to the surface. Her hand tightened around the old brass key, the one her husband had sworn was never to be touched. The inscription shimmered faintly under the flicker of lightning. For Grace. Only if he returns. Lila clung to her arm, trembling. Mom, what is that? Grace's breath came slow and steady. Something your father left behind. Something he never wanted anyone else to see. From across the room, Michael's voice slithered through the dark. You still don't understand, do you, Grace? That man wasn't your savior. He was your shield. She turned toward the sound, her tone razor-sharp but calm. You talk too much for a dead man. A match flared. Michael's face illuminated in orange glow, his smirk twisted. And you still underestimate me. He lifted a small pistol from his coat pocket, casual, like it was an accessory rather than a weapon. Now hand me the key. Lila gasped. You said you didn't want to hurt us. I don't, Michael said evenly, eyes fixed on Grace. I just want what's mine. Grace stood taller. If this key is what you've been chasing, then you've already lost. Lightning cracked through the room, followed by the deafening rumble of thunder. Grace used that instant of blinding light to move, swift and deliberate. She threw a vase from the side table toward the sound of his voice. Glass shattered, Michael cursed, and in the chaos, Grace grabbed Lila's hand. To the cellar, she whispered. They ran, the floorboards groaning beneath their feet, memories flashing like ghosts in every hallway they passed. Down the narrow staircase they went, into the cellar lined with cold stone and silence. Grace flicked the emergency lamp, its dim yellow glow casting long shadows on the wall. At the far end, behind an old bookshelf, was a wooden panel, the secret door her husband had built decades ago. He pushed it open. The safe stood there, large, steel, and ancient. On it, engraved faintly under dust and time, were her husband's initials. Lila's voice shook. What's in there, Mom? Grace stared at the lock. Answers. Her hand trembled as she slid the brass key into the slot. Fit perfectly. For a moment, the air felt too still, as if the house itself was waiting. Then the lock clicked. Inside were files, neatly arranged, sealed envelopes, old photographs. But what made Grace's knees nearly give out was the item lying on top. A letter, yellowed and creased, addressed in her husband's handwriting. She unfolded it slowly. The words blurred as her eyes filled with tears. Grace, if you're reading this, then the storm I feared has come. Michael was my mistake. I trusted him and he turned my work into something dark. The money he wanted, the company he claimed. They were built on lies he crafted, not mine. I left you the key so you'd have proof if he ever came back. Don't let him twist my name. Protect yourself. Protect Lila. Grace pressed the letter to her chest, her shoulders shaking. Lila knelt beside her, whispering, Mom, I didn't know. I'm so sorry. Before Grace could answer, a sound echoed down the stairs, slow, deliberate footsteps. Michael. Grace turned to Lila, eyes steady. Hide. No. Lila whispered fiercely. Not again. I won't let him hurt you. But Grace shook her head. This isn't about fear anymore. It's about ending what he started. Michael's silhouette appeared in the doorway, framed by dim light and shadows. The gun gleamed in his hand. You never did listen, he said softly. Now you'll lose everything again. Grace straightened, holding the letter up like a weapon. You already lost, Michael. I have proof of everything you did. Your threats mean nothing now. His eyes flickered with something, rage or fear she couldn't tell. Then he smiled. You think paper will save you? Not paper, Grace replied calmly. The truth. The storm roared again, shaking the foundations of the house. And in that chaos, a single thunderclap masked the sound of something metallic, the gun slipping from Michael's grasp as Lila struck him from behind with the iron poker she'd found near the stairs. He stumbled forward, crashing into the floor. The gun skidded across the room. Grace didn't flinch. She stepped forward, towering over him. You broke everything we built. But not me. Not anymore. Michael groaned, trying to rise, but Grace's voice cut through the storm. Calm, steady, final. You'll answer for what you did. Lila clutched her mother's hand, shaking. What do we do now? Grace looked toward the open safe, toward the documents, the truth, the years of pain finally uncovered. Her eyes hardened with quiet resolve. We finish what your father started. And just as sirens began to echo faintly in the distance, approaching through the storm, Michael lifted his head weakly and whispered, You have no idea what's really in that safe. Grace froze. What do you mean? She demanded. Michael's lips curled into a faint, broken smile. The letter was just the beginning. Lightning flashed again, and in that brief, blinding light, Grace saw something behind the stacks of papers inside the safe. Small black envelope, unmarked. Her heart skipped a beat. The air thickened, heavy with secrets not yet told. And as the storm outside began to quiet, a new kind of storm began to rise within her. Because whatever was inside that envelope wasn't from her husband. It was from Michael. The cellar had gone silent except for the slow, uneven sound of breathing. Grace's, Lila's, and the faint rasp of Michael Rivers struggling on the floor. The storm had eased into a low hum, the kind that follows a battle not yet decided. But Grace's eyes were locked on the safe, on the small black envelope resting in its shadows like a secret waiting to break everything open. Lila whispered, "Mom, don't." But Grace was already moving. Her fingers brushed the cold paper, her heart pounding like thunder trapped inside her ribs. The envelope had no name, no seal, just one line scrawled in familiar handwriting. If she finds this, it's already too late. Grace's pulse stilled. She tore it open. Inside was a single letter, written in the same unmistakable hand that had haunted her memory. Her husband's. "Grace, if Michael has returned, it means he's found what I feared most. The truth about the company, about what we built, runs deeper than either of us knew. He isn't after money. He's after what's hidden beneath the firm, the files that prove who funded it. They'll come for you next if they think you still have them. I buried the evidence where no one would ever look, in the old estate, beneath the oak tree where we first met. If you ever read this, don't trust anyone, not even Lila. She doesn't know it, but they're watching her too." Grace's throat tightened. Her knees gave out slightly as she clutched the paper. Not even Lila. She turned slowly toward her daughter, pale, trembling, eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Mom," Lila whispered. "What does it say?" Grace's mind spun. Could it be true? Was this just another one of Michael's games? Or had her husband truly hidden something darker than betrayal itself? Michael coughed from the ground, a laugh slipping through cracked lips. "You see, even he didn't trust you. He trusted me." Grace's voice was ice. "No. He warned me about you." Michael grinned, blood staining his teeth. "And about her." He tilted his head toward Lila. "You think she just showed up here out of guilt? You really think she didn't know?" Lila gasped. "That's a lie. I didn't." But Grace's stare stopped her cold. A terrible silence filled the space between them, not of accusation, but of something far heavier. Then came the sound of sirens growing closer, their wails slicing through the storm. Red and blue lights flickered against the basement walls. Michael's smile faded. "You think this ends with me," he murmured. "You've only opened the first door, Grace." Two officers burst through the stairwell, flashlights cutting through the dark. One of them shouted, "Hands where we can see them." Lila raised her hands, trembling. Grace stood still, the letter still clutched in her fist. As they led Michael away, he turned his head and said softly, "You'll never find it without me." And then he was gone, swallowed by flashing lights and thunder. Grace sank to her knees, exhaustion washing over her. Lila rushed to her, holding her tight. "Mom, I swear I didn't know. I just wanted to fix what I broke." Grace's voice was barely a whisper. "Then help me now." The next morning, under pale dawn light, they drove together to the old family estate, a place left untouched since her husband's death. The air smelled of wet grass and earth. The oak tree stood where it always had, roots deep, branches wide like open arms. Grace walked to its base, kneeling where the soil was soft. Her hands trembled as she began to dig. Lila knelt beside her, silently helping. After a few moments, Grace's fingers brushed metal. A small, rusted lockbox. She lifted it free, heart pounding. Inside, not jewels, not deeds, but a flash drive wrapped in plastic and a note. "To my Grace, if you found this, then you've survived more than I ever feared you would face. This drive contains every truth about Michael, the firm, and the people who used him. Expose it only when you're ready, because when you do, they'll come for you too. But remember this. Justice doesn't always come with peace. Sometimes it comes with fire. Love you." Grace closed her eyes. The tears came, not from pain but release. Lila reached for her mother's hand. "So what happens now?" Grace looked at her daughter, really looked. The fear, the regret, the hope. And for the first time in years, she didn't see betrayal. She saw someone trying to make things right. She smiled faintly. "Now we start again. Together." Lila nodded, tears glistening. "I'll follow your lead, Mom." Grace turned back toward the sunrise. The storm was gone. The world quiet again. In her hand, the flash drive gleamed softly in the light, a final secret waiting for justice. But somewhere in the distance, far beyond the trees, an unmarked black car sat idling on the dirt road. Inside, a figure in a dark coat watched them through tinted glass, a phone pressed to his ear. "They found it," he said quietly. Then the car drove off, disappearing into the morning fog. Grace turned, sensing something, but saw only the wind moving through the leaves. She exhaled, calm but unshaken. Because now, she knew the fight wasn't over. It was only changing shape. Thank you for listening. Sometimes justice doesn't roar, it whispers. And when it does, only the brave are quiet enough to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to comment below. You never know whose story might be told next.